Stories of Granny Rose. I needed the money yesterday, my son demanded, handing me his wife's $300,000 debt like it was just a utility bill. Don't disappoint me, Mom, Richard added, his voice ice cold. I just smiled, pouring myself more coffee while he thumbed through texts on his phone. 6 hours later, my bank account was zeroed out. When they came back that evening for the cash, they found the house empty with only a single envelope on the kitchen island. They turned ashen when they opened it. But before we get into the juicy bits, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far the stories of Granny Rose are reaching. The doorbell shrieked at 7:30 on a random Tuesday morning. 3 frantic jabs, like the house was on fire. I knew who it was even before I peeked out. My son Richard only ever showed up unannounced when he was hitting me up for something. I left my half-finished Earl Grey on the kitchen counter and shuffled down the hall. Through the living room windows, I could see his ride, a luxury SUV parked all cockeyed in the driveway. Richard had snagged his dad's business smarts, but zero of his patience or manners. When I opened the front door, he was already glued to his phone, a thick manila envelope tucked under his arm. His face, which always reminded me so much of his late father, was tight. "Mom," he grunted, breezing past me without a real hug, just a quick air kiss by my cheek. "We gotta talk." Richard went straight for the kitchen like he still lived here, even though he bailed for the city over 15 years ago. He plopped down in my favorite chair, slapped the envelope on the butcher block island, and kept scrolling while I trailed in behind him. "Coffee would be killer right now," he mumbled, not even looking up. I brewed the coffee on autopilot. 10 years a widow, and I still waited on the men in my life like it was my one job. As I set the mug down in front of him, I noticed how stressed his hands looked, his knuckles white as he hammered out a text. "Is Fern okay? And the grandkids?" I asked, asking about my daughter-in-law and the kids I barely ever saw. "They're fine," Richard replied vaguely. He finally put his phone down and took a swig of coffee. "I'll cut to the chase, Mom. I'm in a jam." I sat across the island from him. On the wall clock, the minutes crawled by. "Fern got herself into a nasty situation," he went on, shoving the envelope my way. "She made some bad plays investments that tanked." I carefully tore open the envelope. Inside were bank statements, collection notices, and a loan agreement with a number highlighted in blinding red, $300,000. My heart slammed against my ribs. It was practically my whole retirement nest egg, plus whatever was left from selling that tiny place downtown Philly after Edward passed. "Richard," I started, my throat bone dry. "This is pretty much everything I have left." He took another sip of coffee, his cold eyes finally focusing on me. "Mom, you don't actually need this cash. You live solo in this house, it's paid off. Your overhead is minimal, and seriously, you're 68 years old. What are you saving up for a spaceship?" His words felt like a cheap shot. This house, my only real asset, was actually in his name. Edward had done that ages ago to dodge probate and inheritance tax BS. "It's not that simple," I argued. "I have my meds, doctor visits." Richard gave the island a soft tap, cutting me off. "Fern just made some rookie mistakes. She trusted the wrong dude. If we don't clear this by tomorrow—" He took a long, shaky breath. "Things are gonna get ugly. These guys aren't bankers, Mom. They're heavy hitters." "What kind of heavy hitters?" I whispered, my voice barely a squeak. "You don't need the deets," he said impatiently. "Just trust me on this. It's a loan, right? I'll pay you back soon as I get the company books straight." I glanced from the envelope to my son's hard face, then to the back door leading to the patio where he used to play t-ball. It felt like a total stranger was sitting in my kitchen. "You've asked for loans before, Richard. That cash never made it back." His face tightened. "This is serious, Mom. This is not the time for drama." He stood up, pacing my kitchen like a caged Rottweiler. "I'm your only kid. Your family. You always said you'd do anything for me." There it was, the emotional blackmail I knew so well. The same trick Edward used, the one I had fallen for my whole darn life. "I need a minute to think," I said quietly. "There's no time to think," Richard's voice spiked. "I need that money in my account before the end of the business day. Tomorrow's too late." He stopped right behind my chair, his hands landing heavily on my shoulders. I felt their weight like shackles. "Mom," he said, his voice dropping to a smooth, sweet tone, You know I wouldn't ask if it wasn't critical. It's for Fern's safety, for our family. Family. The word that always worked on me. A magic word that made me cave, give in, and sacrifice. Fine, I finally replied. I'll wire it. The relief on Richard's face was practically visible. He flashed the first genuine smile since he got here. That smile, it reminded me of the sweet little boy he used to be. Thanks, Mom. Knew I could count on ya. He checked his watch. Gotta run, big meeting. But I'll swing by tonight for dinner and we can straighten everything out. Deal? I nodded, unable to speak. Richard grabbed the envelope, gave me a rushed peck on the forehead, and headed for the door. Don't disappoint me, Mom. He tossed over his shoulder before he left, like he was the parent and I was the kid. The door slammed, and I was left alone in my kitchen with his half-empty coffee cup and the crushing certainty that I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. Through the window, I watched his SUV peel out, spraying gravel from the lawn I'd babied all these years. That's when the light bulb went off, a crazy idea that the old Eleanor would have never considered. I snatched up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in forever. Marissa? It's Eleanor. I need your help pronto. My friend roared up in less than 30 minutes. Marissa and I had met way back in college, nearly 50 years ago. She went on to become a hotshot corporate attorney. I dropped out to marry Edward. She never approved of my choices, but she always stuck by me, patiently waiting for me to wake up. $300,000? Marissa nearly choked on the tea I poured her. Eleanor, that's bananas. It's all you got. I shook my head, feeling the cold, hard truth sink in. It's not the first time, Marissa. Last year, it was $100,000 for some business expansion. Before that, $50,000 to fix a supplier issue. I never saw a dime of that money again. Quote. Marissa set her mug down with a clatter. Then why do you keep doing it, Elle? You've always been so sharp. How can you not see what's happening? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. Why did I keep doing it? For love? Out of fear? Just old habit? He's my son, I replied. The same canned answer I always gave. And you're his mother, not his damn bank, Marissa shot back. Edward manipulated you for 30 years, and now Richard's pulling the same junk. When is this going to stop? I looked out the window at the rose garden I'd nurtured myself after Edward died. The roses were finally blooming after years of struggling in bad soil. Just like me, they had stuck it out against the odds. Today, I replied, the word shocking even me. It stops today. Marissa blinked at me, confused. What's that supposed to mean? I took a deep breath, feeling a part of me break, and then instantly knit itself back together, stronger. I want you to help me transfer every single penny to an account Richard doesn't know about, and I want you to help me get out of this house before he gets back tonight. Marissa's eyes went wide. Then, a slow, wide grin spread across her face. Eleanor Miller, I've been waiting 50 years to hear you say that. She whipped her phone out of her purse. I have a little beach condo down in Miami that's empty. The keys are at my office. How much time do we have before he rolls back up? He said he'd be back for dinner, maybe 10 hours. Marissa checked her watch. Plenty of time. We hit the bank first. Then we swing by my office so you can sign a power of attorney, just in case we need a legal throwdown. After that, we pack your bags and we are wheels up. I stood up, buzzing with a mix of terror and pure exhilaration. I had never in my entire life made such a radical move. He's going to be livid, I muttered, more to myself than to Marissa. She took my hands. Elle, are you scared of him? I thought of my son's face when he didn't get his way, how his voice dropped, how his eyes went cold. Yeah, I admitted, the same way I was scared of his father. Then it's time to stop being afraid. Marissa squeezed my hands. Let's go grab your stuff. I went to my bedroom and dug out the suitcase I'd only used twice in the last 10 years. I opened the closet and started pulling clothes, but quickly realized I didn't want to take much from this old life. Just the basics, a few outfits, my medicine, important docs, and the handful of jewelry pieces that had sentimental value. At the bottom of my dresser drawer, I found the small wooden box where I kept the only cash Edward never knew about. It wasn't much, a few thousand I'd saved over the years selling my famous pound cakes and some embroidered linens. My little secret, my tiny rebellion. I grabbed the framed photo of my mother but paused over the one of Richard as a kid. After a beat, I left it right there. When I got back to the living room, Marissa was on the phone, a blur of motion. Flight to Fort Lauderdale is confirmed for 3 p.m. We still have time for the bank and the lawyer. At the bank, the manager looked stunned by my request to wire the full amount to a new account. Mrs. Miller, are you absolutely sure? It's a sizable amount. Totally sure, I replied, signing the papers. And I need this transaction to not show up on any statements mailed to my house. As we waited for the wire to clear, Marissa looked at me, a question in her eyes. What are you going to leave, Richard? Some kind of explanation? I thought for a minute. A note, I decided, and a lesson he should have learned years ago. Quote, back at the house, I wrote a quick message on a Post-it and stuck it to the kitchen island. It read, I'm the one who's disappointed. Payback is a B. As I walked out the door with my suitcase, I took one last look at the house that had been my gilded cage for so long. In the garden, the roses swayed in the breeze, free and strong, just like I was going to be from this day forward. In the Uber heading to the airport, Marissa took my hand. You doing okay? I stared out the window, watching the city rush by, taking decades of submission with it. No, I answered honestly, but I will be. Marissa's condo in Miami was small but cozy, with a killer view of the Atlantic. That first night, sitting on the balcony listening to the waves, I powered up my phone only to power it right back down when I saw 17 missed calls from Richard. I wasn't ready for that confrontation. He'll track you down eventually, Marissa said, pouring me a glass of Pinot Grigio. We need a long-term strategy. I nodded, feeling surprisingly calm. I never thought I'd have the guts to do this. I always knew you had it, Marissa smiled. You just needed a little push. In the days that followed, my phone kept lighting up. Richard, Fern, even my sister Janet, whom Richard probably roped in to play missing person. In one voicemail, Richard ping-ponged between frantic pleas and thinly veiled threats. Mom, please call me. I'm worried sick. Then, you can't just bail like this. The house is in my name, remember? Think long and hard about what you're doing. A week after my great escape, I started building my new life, opened a new bank account, rented a small efficiency near the beach, and started looking for ways to fill my time. At 68, I had never really held a job, but I quickly realized my pound cakes and embroidered pieces were a hot ticket at the local arts and crafts fairs. Marissa stayed up north in Boston, but she became my eyes and ears. She was the one who told me about Richard's enraged visit to her office. He was losing it, she recounted over the phone, demanding to know where you were, threatening lawsuits, saying you were mentally unfit to handle your money. And what did you tell him? I asked. I told him you were perfectly sane, and if he kept up the threats, I'd slap him with a restraining order. Marissa chuckled. He turned beet. Red. I don't think anyone's ever stood up to him before. At the end of the first month, I got a formal letter from Richard's lawyer. It demanded my immediate return, claiming concern for my mental health, and threatened legal action to have me declared incompetent. Tucked into the same envelope was a surprisingly humble, handwritten note from Fern. Eleanor, please come home. Richard is totally out of control. The creditors are closing in. We need you. I handed the documents over to Marissa, who fired back a formal reply, including recent medical reports proving my sanity and a detailed affidavit outlining the loans Richard had bled out of me over the years. They have zero case, Elle, Marissa assured me, but Richard won't fold easy. He lost his personal ATM and he's spitting mad. In the second month, I got an unexpected visitor. My daughter-in-law, Fern, showed up at my new place, pale and noticeably thinner. How did you find me? I asked, stunned to see her on my doorstep. We hired a private eye, she admitted, looking embarrassed. Can I come in? I hesitated but finally let her in. Fern took in my small apartment with curiosity. It's cozy, she commented, clearly shocked to see me in such a modest space after the big house I'd left behind. It's mine, I replied simply. We sat on the tiny balcony, the ocean shimmering in the distance. Fern held her teacup with trembling hands. Things are bad, Eleanor, she finally confessed. Richard is different, aggressive, totally unraveling. How are my grandkids? I asked, a pang of guilt hitting me. Scared. They don't get what's happening. Richard sold the SUV. We're trying to move the beach condo, all to cover the debts. She paused. It wasn't just the $300,000, Eleanor. There's a lot more. Q. I wasn't surprised. Edward always had another hidden debt, too. So, you didn't come here to talk me into going back, I stated. You came to ask for more money. Fernanda looked down. It's more complicated than that. The guys we owe are running out of patience. Richard told them you have the money. A chill ran down my spine. Had he used me as collateral? Fern didn't answer, but her silence confirmed it. You need to get out of that house, Fern, I told her, taking her hands. Grab the kids and go to your folks. It's not that simple, she whispered. Richard controls everything. Our bank accounts, our papers. Her voice broke. I don't know how to leave. The same way you didn't know. Her words moved me deeply. It was true. For decades, I didn't know how to get out, how to break the cycle, until I finally found the guts. I can help you, I offered. Not with cash, but with getting out. Fern looked at me with a mix of hope and sheer terror. He'll find us, just like he found you. Then we'll be ready when he does, I replied with a confidence I'd never felt before. But first, we need to get you and the kids the heck out of that house. After Fern left with a getaway plan sketched out, and my new burner phone number stashed carefully in her boot, I sat on the balcony watching the sunset. The fiery orange horizon felt like a symbol of my own transformation. From the darkness into the light, my phone rang. It was Marissa. Fern found you, didn't she? She asked flatly. How'd you know? Richard showed up at my office again, this time with one of his creditors, a scary dude with a facial scar. They dropped subtle threats, wanting to know your location. My stomach dropped. What did you tell them? I told them if they touched a hair on your head, mine or anyone connected to this case, I would personally guarantee they rot in a federal pen. Marissa paused. Elle, this is getting dangerous. Richard is desperate. I know, I replied, watching the last ray of sun dip below the horizon. And desperate people do desperate things. The next morning, I was jarred awake by aggressive knocking. For one terrifying moment, I thought Richard had found me. But when I peered through the peephole, I saw a woman I didn't recognize. Mrs. Eleanor Miller? She asked when I opened the door slightly, keeping the security chain latched. Yes, that's me. Quote, I'm Detective Olivia, she flashed a badge. Metro Police, we need to talk about your son, Richard Miller. My heart hammered. Did something happen to him? The detective's face remained stone cold. May I come in? I let her in and offered coffee, which she accepted. As I made the mugs in my tiny kitchen, I tried to keep my hands from shaking. Mrs. Miller, the detective began, settling onto the sofa. Your son is under investigation for financial fraud, forging documents, and possible ties to loan shark operations. We need to know if you had any knowledge of these activities. I felt like the floor had opened up beneath me. A part of me had always suspected Richard was shady in business, just like his dad, but hearing the words police investigation made it terrifyingly real. No, I answered honestly. I knew he was having money problems, but not the scale or the type of people involved. Quote, the detective jotted something in her notebook. You left your home abruptly 2 months ago, correct? Can you tell us why? I told her everything. The endless loans, the broken promises, the emotional arm twisting, the $300,000 demand. The detective listened without interruption, only making notes now and then. Did he ever use your name on documents? Ask you to sign papers without explaining what they were? I thought back. A few years ago, he asked me to sign some paperwork to streamline financial transfers in case I needed help in my old age. He said it was for my protection. The detective nodded slowly. We've found multiple suspicious transactions in accounts opened in your name, Mrs. Miller. Accounts you likely had no idea even existed. I closed my eyes, a wave of nausea washing over me. Richard hadn't just manipulated me. He'd stolen my identity. What happens now? I asked, fighting to stay composed. We'll continue the investigation. We'll need your formal testimony soon. She hesitated. I have to warn you, your son will likely be indicted in the coming weeks. And considering the people he was involved with, it would be smart to beef up your security. After the detective left, I called Marissa, who promised to fly down to Miami on the next flight. I always knew Richard was up to no good, she said, but I never imagined this. Comes in. That afternoon, I got a text from Fern. He figured out the plan. I'm locked in the bedroom with the kids. He's smashing everything in the house. My blood ran cold. I immediately called Detective Olivia, who promised to dispatch a patrol unit to Richard's address. The next few hours were a blur of calls, texts, and fragments of news. By nightfall, All I knew was that Fern and my grandkids were safe at a women's shelter, and Richard had been taken into custody for questioning after resisting the police intervention. Marissa arrived around 9 p.m., finding me on the balcony, staring out at the dark ocean. She sat beside me in silence for a few minutes. "How are you feeling?" she finally asked. "Guilty," I admitted. "If I hadn't left, maybe none of this would have happened." Marissa shook her head firmly. "No, Eleanor. If you hadn't left, you would be sinking right along with him, probably being used for his next scam. You did the only thing you could do. You saved yourself." She took my hand. "And in doing so, you probably saved Fern and your grandchildren too." The next morning, the headline of the local paper hit me like a ton of bricks. "Local businessman arrested for fraud and mob ties." The mugshot of Richard being led away in cuffs looked like something out of a true crime show, not my reality. My phone rang. It was Detective Olivia. "Mrs. Miller, your son is requesting your presence at the station. He insists on only speaking to you." I looked at Marissa, who had already seen the news and was watching me with concern. "You don't have to go," she said, after everything he'd done. "Yes, I do," I interrupted, surprising myself. "I need to look him in the eye and finally close this chapter." Quote, "The police station was a sterile, impersonal place, with fluorescent lights that somehow highlighted every wrinkle on my tired face. Richard was brought into a visitation room, handcuffed and wearing a gray jumpsuit that somehow made him look smaller, older. When he saw me, his eyes so much like his father's filled with tears. "Mom," he choked out, his voice cracking. "You came." I sat across from him, keeping my hands on the table. "You wanted to see me. I'm here." Quote. Richard looked like a trapped animal, glancing around as if looking for an escape. "You don't understand the mess I'm in," he pleaded, leaning forward. "These guys don't mess around. If I don't pay what I owe—" "No," I interrupted, my voice surprisingly steady. "You don't understand the mess you're in. I'm not here to give you money, Richard. That time is over." His face twisted, the vulnerability snapping into a cold rage. "You abandoned me when I needed you most. Your own family. Is that what you're going to tell your grandkids? That you let their father rot in prison?" I took a slow, deep breath, refusing to be drawn back into his web. "I'll tell them that their father made bad choices, just like their grandfather, and that I finally made a good one." Richard slammed his cuffed hands on the metal table. "The house is in my name. You have nothing." "I have myself," I replied, standing up. "Something I almost lost completely, because of men like you and your father." I walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "Fern and the kids are safe. They'll get a chance to start over away from you." I paused. "And so will I." As I walked out of the police station, I felt a massive weight lift from my shoulders. The Miami sun was bright, almost blinding after the artificial light inside. Marissa was waiting for me by the car. "How did it go?" she asked, concern etched on her face. I took one last look at the drab building where I had left my son and decades of submission. "Liberating," I replied, and for the first time in forever, I smiled a real, genuine smile. 6 months had zipped by since my escape and Richard's arrest. My small apartment finally felt like home, with my little potted herbs on the balcony and the brightly colored embroidered pieces I sold at the local fair decorating the walls. Fern and my grandkids, Ethan and Mariana, had moved to a small town in Idaho near her family. We Zoomed every week, a tech skill I mastered with Marissa's help. The kids were settling in, though they still asked about their dad sometimes. "Grandma, when can we visit you?" Ethan asked during our last call. "Summer vacation," I promised. "We'll build sandcastles and hunt for seashells on the beach." Fern's face popped up on the screen, smiling shyly. She looked healthier, with rosier cheeks and a calmer gaze. "Are you seriously inviting us, Eleanor?" "Of course. My place is small, but we'll all squeeze in. It'll be nice to hear kids laughing around here." I ended the call and sat on the balcony, watching the choppy waves crash on the shore. Richard's trial was scheduled for the next month. The charges were heavy fraud, forgery, using fake documents, criminal association. Marissa estimated at least a 10-year sentence. I had agreed to testify not for revenge, but for justice. For myself, for Fern, and for everyone else Richard had screwed over. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Eleanor Miller." A male voice. Unfamiliar. Yes, who is this? This is David Rodriguez, your son's attorney. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. Richard had cycled through several lawyers lately, each one promising a legal miracle that never happened. What can I do for you? Richard wants to cut a deal. He has info on bigger operations that might interest the district attorney in exchange for a lighter sentence. But he needs your help. I sighed, already knowing where this was going. What kind of help? Financial, of course, to cover the fees for a specialized defense team. $200,000. I almost laughed out loud. The sheer gall of it was unbelievable. Mr. Rodriguez, I no longer have that kind of money. And even if I did, I wouldn't spend it that way. Mrs. Miller, his tone chilled. Your son is facing over 10 years. As a mother, I cut him off. I did what I could for decades. Now Richard needs to face the music for his own actions. There was a long silence on the other end. He said you'd answer like that. He asked me to tell you that he still has copies of documents you signed. Documents that could implicate you in some of his schemes. Quote, my stomach churned, but I kept my voice rock steady. Tell my son that blackmail is another felony to add to his rap sheet, and that I'm ready to face any accusation if it means finally breaking this cycle. I hung up, my hands shaking. I immediately called Marissa and filled her in. He's bluffing, she assured me. Any documents you signed have already been clarified with the police that it was all under duress. Plus, the investigation has already established his pattern of behavior. Quote, still, that night was rough. I stayed awake, mentally reviewing every single piece of paper I'd signed over the years at Richard's or Edward's request. How many contracts? How many POAs? How many documents I barely glanced at, trusting that my husband or my son had my best interests at heart. The next morning I was woken by a knock. It was Detective Olivia again, with another officer this time. Mrs. Miller, we need you to come with us to the station. There's been a development in your son's case. On the drive over, the detective explained. Richard had tried to bribe a guard to smuggle a contraband cell phone into his cell. The guard, who was part of an internal sting, had recorded everything. At the station, they showed me the transcript of a call Richard planned to make the minute he got the phone. It was to one of the guys he owed money to, offering my Miami address as a guarantee he'd pay his debts. My mom has cash hidden away. If I can't pay, you know where to find her. I read the words, feeling a coldness that seeped into my very bones. My own son was willing to risk my life to save his own hide. Mrs. Miller, the detective spoke gently. Considering this new evidence, we are offering you temporary police protection, and we strongly suggest you think about relocating again. I was escorted home by an officer. Marissa was already there, tipped off by the detective. She hugged me tight the minute I walked in. I'm already scouting a new place for you, a gated community with security. I looked around my small apartment at the plants I'd lovingly tended, the colorful curtains I'd sewn, the ocean view that brought me peace every morning. No, I said, surprising myself yet again. I'm not running anymore. I'm not letting Richard keep controlling my life, even from behind bars. Marissa looked at me with a mix of concern and admiration. Eleanor, these people are dangerous. I know, and I'll take every precaution necessary. But this is my home, now the first one I truly chose for myself. I'm not giving it up. In the days that followed, we installed a top-tier security system, cameras, alarms, reinforced locks. The police ramped up patrols in the neighborhood, and 2 plainclothes officers rotated shifts in a car parked right outside. Fern called me in a panic after being told about the situation. Eleanor, come here! Stay with us, please! Quote, I'm safe, honey, I reassured her. And I have a life here now. My craft fairs, my friends, my senior swim classes. I laughed lightly. At 68, I finally figured out who I am when I'm not catering to ungrateful men. A week later, once the initial panic had settled, I got an official envelope. It was a summons to testify at Richard's trial, scheduled for 2 weeks out. Marissa, who had stayed in Miami with me, reviewed the document. You ready for this? Facing him in court won't be easy. Quote, I looked out the window at the ocean that had become my confidant. I'm ready. The courthouse was an imposing building in downtown Boston. I was back in the city for the first time since my escape, feeling a strange detachment from the streets that had been my home for decades. Marissa was driving while I watched the urban landscape blur by. "Nervous?" she asked when we parked. "Strangely, no," I replied. "I feel like I'm finally closing a book." Quote. In the courtroom, I sat next to Marissa in the front row. The prosecutor, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, came over to greet us before the session began. "Mrs. Miller, your testimony is going to be crucial today. Richard is trying to spin himself as a victim of circumstance, manipulated by bigger players. He was always good at playing the victim," I commented dryly. The side door opened, and Richard entered, flanked by 2 guards. He was thinner, his face etched with dark circles. Our eyes met for a moment, his pleading, mine unyielding. The judge entered, and everyone rose. The trial kicked off with the usual procedures, followed by expert testimony detailing the complexity of Richard's financial scams. When my name was finally called, I walked to the witness stand with slow, deliberate steps. After the oath, the prosecutor began. "Mrs. Miller, can you tell us about your relationship with the defendant, your son?" I looked straight at Richard as I spoke. "I raised him alone after my husband's death 10 years ago. Before that, we lived as a seemingly normal family." "Only seemingly?" "My husband, Edward Richard's father, was also manipulative and financially controlling. Richard learned from the best." The prosecutor nodded. "Can you detail how your son manipulated you financially?" I laid it all out. The serial loans, the empty promises, the emotional pressure, the subtle blackmail. In the final incident, he demanded $300,000, practically everything I had, to supposedly pay off his wife's debt. When I realized I would never see that money again, just like the previous amounts, I decided to leave. "What made you make that decision after so many years of giving in to his demands?" I paused, thinking. Was it the contempt in his voice? I answered truthfully. When he said, "Don't disappoint me, Mom," I realized he didn't see me as a person, just as a resource to be tapped. In that moment, something inside me broke, and it immediately fused back together in a different shape. Richard's defense attorney stood for cross-examination. He was a middle-aged man in a pricey suit with a calculated look. "Mrs. Miller, do you consider yourself a good mother?" The question caught me off guard. I saw the prosecutor start to object, but I raised my hand slightly. For decades, I believed being a good mother meant giving my son everything: money, time, my own self-worth. Now, I understand that being a good mother also means teaching accountability and consequences. "You abandoned your son when he needed you most," the lawyer pressed. "No, sir. I stopped enabling destructive behavior. There's a huge difference." "And what about the threats your son supposedly made against you? Don't you find it convenient that these claims are only coming up now, just as he's about to propose a deal with the DA? I stayed calm despite the insinuation. The recordings speak for themselves, and no, I don't find it convenient that my own son offered my address to criminals as collateral for his debts. I find it tragic. When I was finally excused, I returned to my seat, feeling my legs tremble. Marissa squeezed my hand without a word. The trial continued with other witnesses, Richard's former employees, ripped-off clients, even Fern, who described years of lies and manipulation. Through it all, I watched Richard get increasingly agitated, whispering furiously with his lawyer. At the end of the day, when the judge announced a recess until morning, Richard looked at me one last time before being led away. There was no pleading in his eyes anymore, just a cold hatred that made me shiver. Back at the hotel that night, I couldn't sleep. Richard's expression haunted me. It was the same look Edward used to get when he didn't get his way, a mix of fury and calculation, as if he were already plotting his next move. In the morning, we returned to the courthouse to hear the closing arguments. The prosecutor presented a rock-solid case, detailing years of fraud and manipulation. Richard's lawyer tried to paint him as a struggling businessman who made mistakes, but not intentional crimes. When the judge retired to deliberate, Marissa and I walked to a nearby cafe for coffee. I was absent-mindedly stirring my cup when I noticed a man sitting a few tables away watching us. When our eyes met, he quickly looked away. "Marissa," I whispered, "is that guy watching us?" She glanced over discreetly. "He could be a reporter. The case has gotten some local buzz." But something about the man's stiff posture, the way he clearly monitored us while avoiding eye contact, set off alarm bells. "Let's go back to the courthouse," I suggested. As we left, I saw the man get up too. On the walk back, he kept his distance but continued to follow us. At the courthouse, I mentioned the incident to one of the police officers, who promised to keep an eye out. The session resumed with the judge returning to announce his decision. In the case of the state versus Richard Edward Miller, this court finds you guilty on all counts. Quote, a wave of relief washed over me, immediately followed by a deep sadness. My son, the boy I once rocked to sleep, was now officially a convicted felon. The judge continued, detailing the sentence: 12 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 4 years, plus major fines and restitution to the victims. Richard remained expressionless during the sentencing. When the guards approached to escort him out, he turned toward me. This isn't over, he said, just loud enough for me to hear. You're going to regret this. As we left the courthouse, I spotted the same man watching from a distance again. This time I pointed him out directly to the officer walking with us. The man noticed and quickly disappeared into the crowd. We need to get back to Miami today, I told Marissa as we headed for the car. I don't feel safe here. In the week following the trial, I tried to slip back into my Miami routine. Police protection had been scaled back to routine patrols, as Richard's threats seemed less credible now that he was locked up and constantly monitored. One afternoon, returning home from the fair where I sold my embroidered linens, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked near my building. Something about the vehicle made my danger senses spike. Maybe it was the overly tinted windows, or the fact that it was positioned perfectly to watch the building entrance. Instead of going inside, I walked right past and called Detective Olivia. It might be nothing, she admitted, but it doesn't hurt to check. Stay in a public spot while we send someone over. I ducked into a nearby coffee shop and waited, watching through the window. 20 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up beside the suspicious vehicle. 2 men quickly bailed out and tried to walk away, but they were immediately intercepted by the police. My phone rang. It was the detective. Mrs. Miller, we've detained 2 individuals with criminal records. They had illegal weapons and your home address scrawled on a napkin. A shiver ran down my spine. Richard's associates, most likely. We're questioning them now. Do you have a safe place you can stay for a few days? I called Marissa immediately. Her response was quick and decisive. I'm on my way. We're going to my beach house in Naples. No one knows about it. I returned home, escorted by the police, to pack the essentials. As I frantically threw things into a suitcase, I looked around at the home I'd so lovingly built. Once again, I had to run. Or maybe not. A thought began to form. An idea that would have seemed insane to the old Eleanor, but which now made perfect sense. When Marissa arrived, I laid out my plan. It's risky, Elle, she warned. Living in fear is riskier, I countered, and I'm sick and tired of hiding. The next day, instead of laying low in Naples, I went back to my apartment, this time with a clear objective. With the help of Detective Olivia's team, we set a trap. The 2 arrested men had been convinced to cooperate in exchange for lighter sentences. They revealed that Richard, using another inmate's smuggled phone during visiting hours, had hired a 3rd person to give me a euphemism for something much more sinister. He doesn't care if you get seriously hurt, the detective explained. He just wants you to know he still has power, even from behind bars. The plan was simple. I would maintain my normal routine, pretending to be oblivious, while plainclothes officers monitored my every move. When Richard's guy showed up, he'd be arrested in the act. For 3 days, I lived in a state of hyper-alertness. Every sound made me jump. Every stranger on the street felt like a threat. On the morning of the 4th day, as I watered the plants on my balcony, I noticed a man leaning against a lamppost across the street, watching me directly. Our eyes met briefly before I stepped inside and signaled to the plainclothes officer disguised as a housekeeper who was cleaning my living room. That's him, I whispered. I'm sure of it. The man continued to watch the building for about half an hour. Then, he slowly started to cross the street toward the entrance. The doorman, another disguised officer, let him in without question. I sat on the living room sofa, facing the door, and waited. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The police had positioned themselves in the bathroom, the door slightly ajar. The doorbell rang. I took a deep breath and went to answer it. Mrs. Eleanor Miller? The man asked. He was an average-looking guy who could easily blend into any crowd. Yes. I have a message from your son. Close. Before he could make a move, 3 officers burst from different points in the hall, quickly subduing him. The man didn't fight, seeming almost relieved to be caught. Later that day, Detective Olivia visited me to let me know the man had confessed everything. Richard had promised to pay him $5,000 to scare the ungrateful mother who abandoned him. And what exactly did scare entail? I asked. The detective hesitated. It involved breaking some objects in your apartment, making verbal threats, and… She paused. Leaving visible marks on you, nothing fatal, but enough to make you never feel safe again. I sank onto the sofa, my legs trembling. Is that enough for new charges against Richard? Yes. Attempted assault, soliciting a crime, terroristic threats. That will likely torpedo any chance of parole for the next several years. A week later, I visited Richard in prison. He looked shocked to see me, as if he never expected me to have the nerve to face him again. I came to say goodbye, Richard. I said when we sat face to face, separated by the thick glass. Goodbye? He frowned. Yes. The person you tried to scare confessed everything. You're going to face new charges, and you'll probably be here a lot longer than you thought. I paused. But I didn't come here for that. I came to tell you I'm moving on with my life. Richard laughed bitterly. What life? You're 68 years old, Mom. You're all alone. I'm free, I corrected him. And I've discovered it's never too late to start over. You know, I always defined myself as Edward's wife or Richard's mother. Now I'm discovering who Eleanor is. He looked at me with a mix of contempt and confusion. And who is Eleanor? I smiled a real smile. A woman who finally learned to value herself. A woman who is no longer afraid. Richard slammed his hands on the glass, frustrated. You think this is finished? It's not. I'm getting out one day. When that day comes, if it comes, I'll be ready. I stood up. Goodbye, Richard. As I walked out of the prison, I felt a profound lightness I hadn't experienced in decades. The sky was an unusually brilliant blue that day. The air seemed sweeter. Marissa was waiting for me in the car. How did it go? She asked, worried. Liberating, I replied. Truly liberating. A year had passed since my escape. Autumn had rolled into Miami, painting the trees in shades of red and gold. My small embroidery gig had blossomed. I now had 3 students, older women like me, who came every week to learn, and more importantly, to talk. Fern and the kids had visited me twice. Ethan and Mariana filled my condo with their laughter and energy, building sandcastles on the beach and collecting shells that now decorated my balcony. Fern was working as a teacher in her new town, slowly rebuilding her confidence. Richard had been sentenced to 3 additional years for the attempted intimidation. News about him trickled in occasionally through Detective Olivia, who had become a friend. As far as we knew, he was quiet, perhaps finally accepting his situation. One Saturday afternoon, coming home from the craft fair, I found a woman waiting outside my building. She was maybe in her 52nds, with streaks of gray in her hair and a face that looked vaguely familiar. Eleanor Miller? She asked as I approached. Yes, my name is Christine Peterson. She hesitated. I was married to Edward before you. I was stunned. Edward had only vaguely mentioned a previous marriage, saying his ex-wife was unstable and obsessed with money. The irony was not lost on me now. Would you like to come in? I finally offered. Sitting in my small living room, 2 cups of tea between us, Christine explained why she was here. I saw the news about Richard, about how he financially manipulated you for years. She took a deep breath. Edward did the exact same thing to me, and when I read about you, I knew I had to find you, to close the book, maybe. How did you find me? It wasn't hard. Your story went viral among support groups for women who suffered financial abuse. You've become a kind of symbol of resilience. I couldn't hide my surprise. Me? A symbol? Christine smiled. A woman nearly 70 who walked away from everything and started over, facing her own son in court. Yes, Eleanor, you've inspired a lot of us. We talked for hours. Christine told me how Edward had isolated her from her family, controlled every penny, and convinced her she was incapable of managing money. How, when she finally divorced him, he left her with next to nothing, only to turn around and marry me. It was a story that echoed my own life perfectly. When he died, she continued, I felt a strange mix of relief and fury. relief that he couldn't manipulate anyone else, fury that there was never any justice. He never had to face what he did. "I completely get that," I said. "For a long time, I only blamed Richard for his actions, but now I see that Edward planted those seeds. Our son just followed the example he saw at home." "The cycle continues," Christine murmured, "unless someone breaks it." At the end of the afternoon, Christine and I swapped numbers, promising to keep in touch. After she left, I stayed on the balcony watching the sunset, thinking about our conversation. Edward and Richard, father and son, both gone from my life now, one by death, the other by prison, both leaving scars that I was still learning to heal. That night I wrote in my journal, a new habit I'd picked up. The words flowed easily. Today, at 69, I realized I spent most of my life trying to be what others wanted. A devoted wife, a selfless mother, an always available ATM, always giving in, always afraid of disapproval. Now I'm finally learning to just be Eleanor, and I'm discovering that Eleanor is stronger, braver, and more capable than I ever imagined. The money Richard extorted over the years? I can't get it back. The decades I spent in a suffocating marriage to Edward? I can't have them back. But the time I have left, that is all mine. To live exactly as I choose, without fear, without manipulation, without regret. The next day, I got an email from Christine. She had talked to other women who went through similar situations and suggested starting a support group. I agreed immediately. Our first meeting was at a little cafe by the beach. There were 5 of us, all with stories of financial and emotional control by husbands, sons, and brothers. We shared our pain, our anger, and our small, hard-won victories. At the end of the meeting, Marissa, who had come along, suggested, "You should formalize this, start a nonprofit or something. So many women out there need to hear these stories, need to know it's never too late to start over." The idea quickly took shape. In a few months, New Beginnings was officially registered as a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping women recover from financial and emotional abuse. Using my embroidery skills, I created our logo, a colorful phoenix rising from the ashes. Our first public workshop drew over 50 women. I was nervous walking onto the small makeshift stage, but as I started to speak, my voice grew strong. "My name is Eleanor Miller. I'm 69 years old. For almost 7 decades, I allowed others to control my life and my money. First my husband, then my son. Until one day, when my son demanded $300,000, almost everything I owned, something inside me snapped and then immediately repaired itself. I looked out at the focused faces in the audience. It is never too late to say no. It is never too late to start over. And it is never, ever too late to find out who you really are when you're not living for someone else's approval." The applause was deafening. 2 years after my escape, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Richard, written in a handwriting that seemed more contained, less frantic than I remembered. "Mom, it's weird writing that word now. I think I've lost the right to use it. I'm writing not to beg for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but to say I'm in therapy here in prison. The counselor made me see patterns I was blind to before, how I repeated Edward's behavior with you exactly, how I learned to see people as means to an end, not as human beings. I'm not apologizing. I'm just owning the truth. And the truth is, you were right to make me face the consequences of my actions. I know you'll probably trash this letter, and I don't blame you. I just wanted you to know that despite everything, I'm proud of who you've become. I saw your picture in the paper, speaking to those women. You looked different, stronger. Richard." I read the letter several times, feeling contradictory emotions. Caution, because I knew Richard's talent for manipulation, sadness for what could have been, and surprisingly, a flicker of hope. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I took the letter to my next therapy session, another healthy habit I'd picked up in my new life. "What do you want to do?" my therapist asked after I read the letter to her. "I don't know. Part of me wants to believe he's actually changing. Another part reminds me how many times I was burned before." "What if both parts are right?" she suggested. "What if he's genuinely trying to change, but it's still not safe for you to reconnect?" Those words stuck with me. Finally, I wrote a brief response. "Richard, I received your letter. I can't say I trust your words. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. But I acknowledge your effort to seek help and reflect on your actions. My life now is focused on helping women who went through what I did. I have found peace and purpose in that work. I sincerely hope you find your path too. If it is a true path of change, perhaps we can talk again one day, not as the mother and son we were, but as two people trying to do better. Eleanor. I mailed the letter without any big expectations. I didn't expect a reply, and I didn't get one for months, and that was okay. My life had a trajectory of its own now, independent of Richard or the shadows of the past. Spring arrived in Miami, splashing the city with vibrant colors. Our organization, New Beginnings, had grown, now with a small office downtown and dedicated volunteers. Twice a week we offered free financial literacy workshops, something I had to learn from scratch myself at 68. Fern had become a frequent collaborator, sharing her own journey of financial and emotional recovery. My Saturday afternoons were reserved for my grandchildren, who now visited me regularly. Ethan, almost 10, loved to fish off the pier near my apartment. Mariana, 8, had taken an interest in my embroidery. "Grandma," she asked me one afternoon as we worked on a piece together, "are you happy now?" The question caught me off guard. I stopped stitching and looked at my granddaughter, her curious eyes, her innocent face. "Yes, honey," I answered sincerely. "Happier than I've ever been." Quote, "Even without Grandpa and Dad?" I chose my words carefully. Sometimes, Mariana, we have to step away from the people we love to find ourselves. That doesn't mean we stop loving them. It just means we have to love ourselves too. She seemed to think about that, her small eyebrows furrowed in concentration. Like when I need to be alone in my room sometimes, even though I like playing with Ethan. I smiled, admiring her childlike wisdom. Exactly. Quote. In June of that year, I received an unexpected call. It was Detective Olivia. "Mrs. Miller, I'm calling to inform you that your son will be transferred to a halfway house next month." The news surprised me, I thought, with the extra charges. "He's demonstrated exceptional behavior," she completed all his rehabilitation programs, and his lawyers managed to get a sentence review. He'll still have strict restrictions, but he'll be allowed to work during the day. Quote, I thanked her for the information and hung up, feeling an anxiety I hadn't known in a long time. Richard would be partially free. What did that mean for me, for Fern, for the kids? I called Marissa immediately. "Do you think I need to worry?" I asked after telling her the news. Marissa, ever practical, replied, "We'll upgrade your apartment security just in case. But honestly, Eleanor, I doubt he'll try anything. He has too much to lose." Quote, a week later, I received another letter from Richard. Unlike the first one, this was formal, almost distant. "Eleanor, I am being transferred to a halfway house next month. I wanted you to hear it from me. I will be working on a reforestation project during the day and returning to the facility at night and on weekends. I have no intention of looking for you or interfering with your life in any way. I learned my lessons the hard way. The therapist here says that respecting boundaries is the first step toward healthy relationships. I am trying to practice that. I also wanted you to know that I've been corresponding with Fern about the kids. She agreed to let me write them letters under her supervision. Maybe one day I can see them again, when she feels it's safe. Richard." The missing mom at the beginning and end of the letter didn't go unnoticed. He was truly attempting to establish a new dynamic, acknowledging that our old relationship was irrevocably broken. I shared the letter with Fern on our next video call. She confirmed that she was indeed allowing Richard to write to the kids. "Their therapist believes it's important not to completely demonize their father," she explained. "And his letters have been different. He asks about their interests. He doesn't try to manipulate. He doesn't make empty promises." Do you think he's really changed?" I asked. Fern shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe he's learned to be more subtle. That's why everything is supervised." She paused. "Are you going to respond to this one?" I thought for a moment. "I think so. To make it clear that I'm aware of the situation and that my boundaries remain intact." My reply was brief. "Richard, thank you for informing me about your transfer. I wish you well in this new phase. I am glad you are in supervised contact with your children. They deserve a father who can be a healthy, positive presence in their lives. As I said before, I have found my way. I sincerely hope you find yours, too." Eleanor. July brought sweltering heat. On a particularly sticky Wednesday, I got an unexpected call. "Mrs. Eleanor, This is Sophia from the Correctional Rehabilitation Center. We have a situation with your son, Richard Miller. My heart skipped a beat. Is he okay? Physically, yes, but there was an incident at the worksite today. He had an altercation with another inmate and, well, he refused to fight back when provoked. He actually walked away and found a supervisor. The problem is, that makes him a target for the other inmates, and we're worried about his safety. What does that have to do with me? I asked, confused. Richard requested a transfer to another project, ideally one where he can work alone or under direct supervision. We have an opening in an urban rehabilitation program, restoring a public park near your neighborhood. But we need your approval, given the history between you. I was silent for a moment, processing. Richard had chosen not to retaliate, even when provoked, something the Richard I knew would never have done. And now he needed my help. Did he specifically ask to work near me? I asked cautiously. No, ma'am. Actually, when we mentioned the location, he hesitated and asked if there were other options, but this is the only project that meets his security needs right now. That surprised me. Richard was actually trying to respect my space. How far would his worksite be from my apartment? I asked. About 15 blocks. He would not have permission to leave the project zone, which will be monitored. I took a deep breath. Okay, I give my approval. After hanging up, I questioned my decision. Was I being naive again? Or was I finally showing compassion without sacrificing my boundaries? I called Marissa and explained the situation. You did the right thing, she assured me. Keeping Richard safe while he tries to rehabilitate doesn't mean dropping your guard. It just means you're human, and you have empathy. The following week, Richard started his new job at the park. Deliberately, I changed my market route to pass near there, keeping my distance. I saw him from afar, planting saplings under the scorching Sunday. He was thinner, his posture less arrogant. For a second, he seemed to sense my presence and looked my way, but I didn't approach. In August, I received another letter. Eleanor, I know you saw me at the park a few weeks ago. Thank you for not approaching, and thank you for approving my transfer to this project. The work has been therapeutic. There is something profoundly satisfying about turning an abandoned space into something beautiful and useful for the community. I am not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I just wanted to express gratitude for this small act of kindness that I don't deserve. Richard. The letter felt different from the others, more grounded, less manipulative. I decided to respond with a symbolic gesture. The next day, I dropped off a small box at the community center, supervising the project. Inside were high-quality gardening tools and a book on urban landscaping. No note, no expectations. Weeks passed without a response, and that was fine. I had learned that healthy relationships don't require immediate or calculated reciprocity. In September, our New Beginnings organization hosted a major event, a weekend workshop on financial independence for women. I was the main speaker, sharing my journey from total dependence to financial autonomy. On the morning of the event, the hall was packed with nearly 100 women. I walked onto the stage, feeling that familiar mix of nerves and determination. Good morning, I began. My name is Eleanor Miller. At 70 years old, I am learning who I am when I am not being defined by the men in my life. The audience laughed softly, many nodding in recognition. 3 years ago, my son showed up at my door demanding $300,000, almost everything I had. Like so many times before, he was counting on my inability to say no. And as many of you know, these patterns don't just pop up out of nowhere. They are nurtured over decades. In my case, it started with my husband controlling every penny, every decision, making me believe I was incapable of managing my own life. As I spoke, I noticed movement at the back of the room. A tall, thin figure had entered discreetly and was standing near the door. My heart lurched as I recognized Richard. For a second, I lost my train of thought. The audience sensed my distraction, some turning to see what had caught my eye. I took a deep breath and continued. The hardest, most liberating moment of my life was when I finally said no. When I walked out that door with nothing but a suitcase and the determination to no longer be an extension of someone else's bank account. I spoke for another 30 minutes, aware of Richard's silent presence in the back. He didn't try to get closer. He just listened. When I finished, I received a standing ovation. Women surged forward to share their stories, ask for advice, and offer thanks. Richard stayed put, waiting patiently for the crowd to thin out. Finally, when the hall was nearly empty, he slowly approached. He seemed hesitant, vulnerable in a way I had never seen him before. "Hello," he said simply. "Hello," I replied. "Your speech was incredibly powerful and painful to listen to." He paused. "Thank you for the gardening tools." We stood in an awkward silence. Two people who were once so close, now practically strangers. "How did you know about the event?" I finally asked. "Fern mentioned it in a letter. I asked for special permission to come, just to listen." I nodded, noticing how he respected the boundaries, asking for permission instead of asserting rights. "Are you okay?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I'm different," he replied after a moment of reflection. "Learning to live with the consequences of my choices, learning to exist without manipulating or controlling, that people are not means to an end." We talked for almost an hour. There were no grand revelations or dramatic reconciliations, just two adults sharing their experiences honestly, perhaps for the first time. When we said goodbye, Richard asked, "Can we do this again sometime?" "Maybe," I replied. "One step at a time." Quote. The next morning, walking on the beach with Marissa, I thought about the meeting. "Do you think he's really changed?" my friend asked. "I think he's trying," I answered honestly. "And that's more than Edward ever did." "And what about you? Are you ready to forgive?" I watched the waves crash on the sand, their eternal rhythm of destruction and renewal. "Forgiveness isn't something you give all at once," I finally said. "It's a daily practice. I'm learning to forgive both him and myself for letting it go on for so long." That afternoon, sitting on the balcony of my small condo, I wrote in my journal, "Today, at 70, I'm learning that life rarely offers perfect endings. There's no guarantee Richard has truly changed, or that he'll stay on this path. There's no certainty I won't fall back into old patterns in moments of weakness. But maybe life isn't about perfect endings. Maybe it's about starting over as many times as necessary. About breaking toxic cycles, even when it seems impossible. About believing we can be more than our worst moments or our most painful mistakes." The money Richard demanded that morning 3 years ago was the price of my freedom, a steep price, but infinitely less than the cost of remaining trapped in a life that wasn't truly mine. Today, I'm not financially rich. I live simply. I earn enough selling my embroidery and with my small savings. But I am immensely rich in other ways, in genuine friendships, in purpose, in inner peace, in a courage I didn't know I possessed. And if there is one lesson I want to leave for my granddaughters, for all the women I meet through new beginnings, it's this: it's never too late to say no. It's never too late to rediscover who you are when you're not living to please others. It's never too late to start over. At 70 years old, I'm not ending my story. I'm just beginning to write the most authentic chapters. I closed the journal and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Tomorrow would be another day of work at the organization, another chance to turn my pain into purpose, my experience into guidance for others. The doorbell rang. It was Marissa holding a bottle of Chardonnay. "To celebrate," she said. Walking in, "What are we celebrating?" 3 years since you said no. 3 years of freedom." Quote. We smiled and clinked glasses under the sunset sky. "To courage," I proposed. "To Eleanor," Marissa corrected, finally living her own damn life. Now, if you loved this story, click that subscribe button and tell me in the comments what part blew you away. Oh, and don't forget to become a channel member for access to exclusive videos I don't post here. I'll catch you there.